It's not every day that you get to watch government tyranny run face first into the Linux ecosystem, and then the tyrants actually back down when they realize what they're up against. But that is basically what just happened with these operating system age attestation laws. The lawmakers looked at Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android, and they realized that those are your bog standard corporate operating systems, and the trillion-dollar companies that are responsible for them can be forced to comply, or hell, the mobile OSs, they already ask for your date of birth whenever you set up an account for them anyway, so they're basically halfway to compliance with these laws already. But then the government looked at Linux, and they realized that the Penguin is not one company, not one app store, not one account system, and definitely not one person that you can drag into a hearing and then threaten with a fine for not bending the knee. So the state of California and Colorado, they were pushing laws that would make operating systems collect a user's age bracket and expose that age signal to apps, app stores, browsers, and or websites. The goal was supposed to be child safety online, but the implementation started drifting into something much bigger. The operating system itself becoming a government data collection tool. And once you turn the OS into the source of truth for this user is under 13, or this user is 13 to 15, or this user is an adult, you're not just regulating TikTok at that point. You're changing the trust model of the entire device, the entire physical device that you own, and opening the door to turning every physical device into a massive data collection dragnet. And the on-device age verification is an issue that a lot of non-techie people don't really seem to understand. You know, normal people hear age verification and they think about some website asking if you're over 18, but these bills are not about just making pop-ups appear on sketchy websites. The operating system model is much deeper than that. The OS account setup process collects the age information, it stores it somewhere, and then it exposes a real-time signal through some kind of API, which is another gray area. I mean, how is this API implemented? But anyway, exposes it through an API so applications can then query that to figure out whether or not you're supposed to be accessing whatever it is you're trying to access. So that means that the age check moves from the website layer down into the platform layer, and that is a very different beast to deal with. For Apple, Google, Microsoft, and the big ecosystems, that model is pretty much already in place. Like I said, they have the centralized cloud accounts that I guess you don't necessarily need to create. I mean, there are ways to bypass the cloud accounts on all of those operating systems as far as I know, but most people, they end up getting forced into creating the online account pipeline, which typically collects age information in some way, usually a more direct way by just asking your exact date of birth. And also, these companies control massive app distribution channels via their app stores. They already have compliance departments to make sure that, you know, they're not publishing things in there that certain ages aren't supposed to access. They have lawyers, they've got account recovery workflows, parental controls, and a lot of device telemetry built in. You know, they're already collecting a lot of your information if we're talking about the centralized operating systems. And I think that's why the users of those operating systems don't see the addition of one more regulated age bracket signal to those OSs as very annoying. It's not an existential issue for them. But with Linux and other free and open source operating systems, there is no single Linux or BSD company. There is no universal Linux account database. There's no single Linux app store. There is no true one package manager. And this is the reason why the original age attestation approach created such a mess for the free software ecosystem. Because if a Linux distro had to collect age data during installation on first boot, for one, where does that data even live, since all of these systems are designed differently? I mean, is it going to be in Etsy password? Is it going to be in systemd, homed? What if the user doesn't use systemd? Does it have to be shoved into a dbus service? Is every app now expected to query the OS before it starts? And what happens if the user just removes that code and compiles their own version of the app? What happens if you remove that code from every open source program that is in the OS and then compile your own distro and you serve it over BitTorrent with a seed box based in Belarus that you paid for with Monero? I mean, in the proprietary world, those types of things are easy to enforce and fight against. But in the Linux world, you just can't regulate a damn thing, depending on how far people are willing to go to defy the regulation. And that's what I think ultimately triggered these new amendments. So California's AB 1856 updates the state's Digital Age Assurance Act language, and it now defines an operating system provider in a way that excludes people or entities distributing an operating system or application under license terms that would let the recipient copy, redistribute, and modify that software. So in plain English, California appears to be carving out the normal free software distribution model for their laws. If you're distributing code under licenses that allows a user to have those freedoms to copy it, modify it, and share it, you're not treated like the same kind of operating system provider as Apple or Microsoft. Colorado's bill goes even further into the technical wording. Their final text says that the article does not apply to an operating system provider or developer that distributes an OS or app under license terms, allowing the recipient to again copy, redistribute, and modify the software without platform-imposed technical or contractual restrictions on installing all modified versions. Now, that last phrase matters because it's not just a matter of if the source code is visible, it's about whether the user can actually install modified versions without the platform owner blocking them in some way. Because that's the real difference between real software freedom and sure, here's some source code, but the bootloaders and the store rules and the signing keys and all the low-level stuff you need to really have control over your device still belong to us. The Colorado bill also excludes some of the exact infrastructure that a lot of open source developers were worried about. So the bill's definition of a covered application excludes apps from free, publicly available code repositories, and the definition of a covered application store excludes code repositories and containerized software distribution. Now that matters because otherwise things like GitHub, GitLab, distro package repositories, the Docker-style registries, and similar developer infrastructure could have been dragged into the same App Store compliance model as a commercial mobile app marketplace. And that would have had downstream effects like forcing age checks into servers and embedded devices that you're trying to load software from those repos onto, which I doubt was ever really the intent of creating these laws in the first place. So technically what this means is that the nightmare mode version of these laws are largely avoided by the current amendments that were made to them. A normal community Linux distro should not need to add a mandatory first boot birthday screen just so that your terminal emulator can verify you're old enough to run a sudo command. And this also means that distro maintainers are not going to have to figure out how to actually implement this stuff in the first place, because there were discussions going on for a while about, how would we actually do that if we're forced to do it, and otherwise the software ends up being illegal. People floated ideas like an OS local API through a dbus service where applications could query an age bracket without sending telemetry back to a company. There was also an optional birth date field that was added into the systemd's JSON user record format back in March, coincidentally enough. But the optional metadata existing in systemd is not the same thing as a legal mandate to collect birth dates from every single user. And again, systemd, regardless of its faults, is still free software. So any OS maintainer could just remove the optional metadata code from it before compiling their own distro with, I hate to say it, but the world's most popular init system. But like I hinted to earlier when I was reading the language of the Colorado bill, there are still some gray areas in the amended bill to be concerned about. So not every Linux-based thing is really treated like a fully open source community Linux distro. So Android, for example, it is based on Linux roughly and a lot of other open source components, but the Android version, like the Android OS that ships on most phones, especially like a Google Pixel or a Samsung phone especially, it's wrapped in Google services, it's wrapped in OEM accounts, proprietary app stores, a containerized corporate ecosystem, and again, with the Samsung phones in particular, and also the Google phones now, they're shifting towards a more locked down phone system where you can't necessarily load your own customized version of the OS onto the device. So these companies fully control the phones. It's not truly free and open source. It's not a device that you can truly do whatever you want with. SteamOS is Linux-based as well, but again, that's tied to Valve's commercial storefront, and their gaming platform. So even though those systems that I mentioned, the Steam Deck more so than the Android phones, even though those systems are mostly open source, they're likely still going to have some kind of compliance exposure based on how the amended bills are written. So, in case you needed another reason to use free and open source software and free and open source platforms and operating systems, you're seeing the power unfold in real time. Free software is controlled by the users, not by some company or by the government's heavy hand. And even though a lot of maintainers were considering implementing some form of compliance into a low-level system within Linux that users would have to manually rip out themselves, other people, like the Artix Linux devs, were willing to stand up to the tyranny, and other people were then willing to distribute the ISOs of Artix through ungovernable methods like torrents. And that's the main thing that I think the average person can understand and appreciate about these distros and app repositories is that free software truly makes you digitally ungovernable. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it to hack the algorithm, and check out my online store, based.win, where you can buy my awesome merch and accessories for your phone or laptop. 10% store-wide discount when you pay with Monero X Smart checkout. Have a great rest of your day.